Hey, hear real weird and scary stories. But don't worry, everything will be fine.
The stone door slid shut overhead, casting the stairwell in darkness, and I heard the prisoner correctly. Or I shook the nonsense from my head. Maybe his name really was Thor, but that didn't mean he was the Norse god, right? I gripped the sword given to me and turned down the narrow, spiraling stairwell. It was dimly lit. I kept my palm pressed against the wall to help guide myself down the dizzying spiral. The chaos from earlier out quiet. Oddly enough, I found this more concerning. Was the beast waiting for me? Further down the spiral, I began to feel the error room well acquainted with death, an environment that had become sodden with pain and desperation, and ultimately, defeat. The sword trembled in my hand. I held it ready, as if I'd be able to use. But Thor had said it would be useless until I'd eaten one of Idun's apples. Apple? Had I not already observed the things that occur within the tower? I would have laughed at the notion of an apple being more than just fruit. As the stairwell opened up to the next chamber, I could see the glint from lit torches reflecting off puddles of blood, and in those puddles laid mangled bodies. Swords were scattered around them. The chamber had that familiar copper-like odor, but there was another smell, the stink of an unwashed dog. The stairway was at the center of the room, and I had to step into the chamber if I were to get sight of what was on the other side. I crept out of the stairwell. A crimson puddle splashed around my foot. As if on cue, the mangled corpses began to convulse. Meat and bone shook violently. I stumbled back to the stairwell and watched in horror as limbs began to reattach. The bodies began to shift and rotate, popping and cracking back into place. Spilled organs slid across the stone floor and returned to their fleshy homes. Open wounds resealed. Color returned to the skin of the fallen warriors. The men gasped as their lungs refilled with air. They sat up wide-eyed, as if they'd just awoken from a nightmare. Reality hit them and they hurriedly scrambled for their blades. There was a heavy gallop, accompanied by the sound of clothes clicking against the hard floor. For these men, the nightmare was not over. Bounding past the stairwell was the largest wolf I'd ever seen, bigger than any elephant in Wrath, black fur wet with blood, a tail long as a bus, feet the size of cars. The creature snarled loud as a locomotive, then sunk its fangs into a flailing warrior. With a quick whip of its head, the wolf flung the warrior across the room, crashing him into the stone cylinder that housed the stairwell. The warrior landed at my feet with a wet thud. There were about 8 or 9 men battling the beast, and to my surprise, they were actually capable of sinking their blades into the animal and causing it pain, but doing so only angered the wolf more. I watched as 2 more warriors were ripped to pieces. The sound of bones breaking and flesh being torn from their bodies was nauseating. I quickly slipped out of the stairwell and to the other side. Another body was thrown past me, hitting the ground and sliding to a stop, face down in a puddle of blood. I hastily scanned the chamber for the next door. I searched the floor for any out-of-place creatures, but again found nothing. How was I supposed to get to the next level? Slightly to my left, on the far end of the chamber, there was a shadowy spot that the light did not touch. I leaned towards it and squinted. Something was there. A door. I looked to make sure the wolf was still preoccupied and then sprinted towards the shadow. As I got closer, I realized what it was and stumbled to a halt. In the shadow stood a woman. She had long, black hair that draped across her shoulders and to her waist. She was tall and thin, and wore a dark gown. Her skin was pale on one side, but her left side looked darker. Maybe it was just the shadows, I thought. She held out her hand and beckoned me towards her. With hesitation, I approached, while also paying attention to my peripheral for the wolf. A chorus of shouting and growling echoed throughout the chamber. I reached the woman and could see why her skin appeared to be two different colors. One half was pale flesh, the other was decaying and corpse-like. I immediately staggered backwards, fearing I'd fallen into a trap. "Do not fear me," she said. Her voice was hushed, yet piercing. I could feel it in my bones. Her expression was gloomy and lacked any hint of friendliness despite her assertion. I held my sword in front of me, ready to swing at the first sign of hostility. "Who are you?" I asked. "I will lead you to him." "Who?" "The one who calls for you." She stepped aside and gestured at a narrow passageway. "It's opening only about knee-high." "That's the way down?" I asked. "Yes." I knelt and could see that the opening immediately hooked to the left upon entry. "Lead the way," I said. I quickly turned to check the status of the wolf and could see that he was working on the final warrior. I turned back to the woman. She was gone. "Oh," I said. I crawled into the narrow opening and looked around the corner. A tight space continued curving downwards and to the left. "Oh," I shouted, but there was no response. I looked over my shoulder. The wolf was staring at me from across the room, breathing heavily. Eyes were more than animal, more than human even. His gaze was penetrating and hungry. However, it did not give the impression that it was craving food, but rather a desire to cause suffering. Blood dripped from its large, snarling mouth. The wolf pointed its nose to the ceiling and let out an ear-splitting howl. The hairs on my arm jumped to attention. I lunged further into the passageway and squeezed around the corner. I kicked off the wall into a desperate crawl. There was barely enough space to move my arms. My back kept pounding against the surface above me. Behind me I heard the sudden shifting of stone. The howling became muffled as the cramped tunnel was plunged into darkness. Claustrophobia set in. In the pitch black, the small space felt even smaller. The walls seemed as if they were closing in on me. My heart rapidly pounding drum. I frantically propelled myself forward. My mind was racing. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. There wasn't any air. I was suffocating. Then there was a noise. Movement. It was behind me. The smacking of hands against the stone surfaces. On Slapu, the third was further away. 4, 5, 6. Back and forth. Near then far. It sounded like a dozen people were in there with me. What the hell was happening? I crawled faster. My body was bouncing off every surface. I didn't care. I had to get out. I tried to yell help, but I could only manage a weak murmur. I was panicking, the sword clanging with each frantic move. Slap, slap, slap. My mind was spinning. Hurry, you're running out of time, I thought to myself. The tunnel was getting narrower. There wasn't any light up ahead. Where was the end? My heart felt like it was going to explode. The walls were pressing against my shoulders more and more. I shifted to my side. I could feel my eyes pulsating. My ears were ringing. I dragged myself forward with one arm. It was getting narrower. Ugh, I yelled. Narrower. I couldn't breathe. The walls were tightening against my back and chest. I pushed with my legs. I was becoming wedged. Another strong push with my legs. A sudden jolt of pain rattled my head as I came to an abrupt halt. It was a dead end. I was trapped. Oh, no. Please. No. I cried. Something brushed against my feet. I kicked empty air behind me. I pounded the wall with my fist. Help! I was losing hope. Please. How could it end like this? I'd made it this far. I weakly slapped the wall once more, and it opened.